Every 4 years, we hear the words Electoral College over and over again, but we never talk about what a ridiculous and, frankly, undemocratic system it really is.
Really, Adam? Well, the name of his program is correct, at least. You ruined common sense this time. Now, let me get on my soapbox and break out the absolute compendium of all human knowledge to counter this extremely ignorant position. Now, lately, you may have heard a little bit of complaining about the Electoral College. And there's a reason for that. People are goddamn stupid, and Americans have an incredibly weak long-term memory. Now let's get in the time machine and move forward from my time in prehistory to a time in your not-so-distant past. You call it colonial America. Sorry about that, I got a little carried away. I had a lot of fun with it, though. You see, the Founding Fathers were pretty smart men in a time where people appreciated intelligence and not what celebrity was wearing what. They knew things about history, other cultures, government types, table manners, and were very well read on the subjects. They didn't know what the future held, but they sure as hell knew what the past had wrought. Tyrannical kings and queens, authoritarian control over speech, populist disarming, pricks proclaiming they were sent by some conveniently mysterious and all-powerful god to tell everyone what to do, and the threat of a ride across the river Styx for any plebe dumb enough to say, I disagree. They also knew about governmental systems that were at least in part superior to virtually anything on the planet at the time, like ancient Greece and Rome. In fact, much of the United States was to be founded on the important lessons learnt from the glory days of Rome. Did you know the original name for the District of Columbia was Rome? All of this knowledge led them to believe, rightfully, that a government was a very dangerous but necessary thing to have, and a general government of a republic like the United States could easily turn into a god-king dictatorship. To set things up, we need to have a basic understanding of what makes us a republic. The United States. First off, we are not a democracy. A republic. Not a democracy. We are not now, nor will we on November 7th of 2016, nor have we ever been a democracy. We are a republic. That is, we are a group of essentially nation-states, separate entities under a constitutional contract together, represented by a general government. And back then, at the founding of the country, if the various territories wanted to become part of a larger republic, a union of states, and all of the benefits that would entail, they would agree to that constitutional contract, which would require the states to protect the rights and freedoms of their people, which is one of the reasons I can even make this video. And then they would grant the general government of this union a little bit of power to enforce that contract, but limit its scope and powers heavily to prevent it from gaining absolute control over the citizens of the country, and leaving all other powers to the people in their states, provided they don't override the Constitution. So, functionally, we're a group of 50 individual little countries, each with their own needs and desires. We're not just arbitrary lines on a map that tell you where the best cheese, potatoes, and smugness comes from. Looking at it all this way, you could immediately understand that the President of the Republic is the most dangerous position of them all. He's meant to be the ultimate voice of the people, our ultimate representative, having the power to veto Congress, set up his cabinet as he sees fit, and run foreign affairs with a large amount of unilateral power. This position was considered to be so dangerous that it would have to be voted on every 4 short years by the people of the states. With all this in mind, they did all kinds of things to prevent an all-powerful rulership by some asshat god king, like limit the power and scope by absolute law, as I mentioned, exactly what the general government could do, even suggesting that people had the right and obligation to overthrow it the moment it hits a point of no return and starts screwing over the citizens. Just as the states have a voice in Congress, with your senators and House of Representatives, these pretty smart men also set up a system to ensure the states and citizens had a real voice in the highest position in the land. We call it the Electoral College. Those horrible, white, cisgendered, patriarchal founding fathers were aware of the bottomless pit of stupidity, the well of ignorance your average person drinks from, so they ensured this position couldn't be elected via mob rule. Gawker never would have existed. The Washington Post would be boycotted into bankruptcy. The Huffington Post and CNN wouldn't have daily lead articles in Google's news if people had the time, inclination, or average intelligence to read up and think for themselves. Mob rule was a real concern for them, and it's a real concern now. As an example, let's say Joe Exotic runs again in 2020, and his platform this time is based around burning the Bill of Rights and making the owning of tigers compulsory. The Constitution may generally forbid this kind of action, but if enough dumbasses in a direct vote system want this, not necessarily the many states, then the representation they elected in Congress would be compelled to vote on amendments that effectively do that. They want to get reelected, so that's what they do. When it comes to the reality-separated majority of the most populated states, the surprisingly numerous crack-smoking, Tinder-loving, Snapchat-posting, Facebook-adoring, NPR-consuming denizens of California, New York, Oregon, and most of New England, they would think this is literally the best idea ever, especially ditching things like those problematic amendments in the Bill of Rights. Our progressives would abolish the first, second, fourth, rewrite the fifth and sixth, laugh about the ninth, and wipe the 10th with their collective asses. At any rate, in the case of Joe Exotic gaining serious popularity, the Electoral College would ensure, despite their lower populations, the other states still have a voice that carries some weight. Even if somehow Mr. Exotic garners the most votes cast, he may not win the Electoral College. What matters is that the majority of the Republic supports you, not if the majority of people in the country do. That is the contract the various states have agreed to if they want to be a member of the United States. Hey, it's not just the name of a country, it's an accurate descriptor. The other thing the Electoral College has the potential to prevent in a republic is if the government of a state pushes their own agenda instead of listening to the will of the people. If Illinois, for example, and I live there, it's a hellhole, don't go. If they don't like the winner, the state's government, sans Electoral College, could just speak as representatives for their citizens and cast the vote how they like instead of how people voted. Or even not let them vote at all and essentially appoint the president. Don't think that's too far-fetched either. There's a plethora of dumb shits in Colorado, for example, that would be happy if they could overturn state constitutional law that requires Electoral College members to vote how the people want, and that's despite the Rockies voting in favor of Hillary. They want things to go their way, no matter if it undermines the republic and the will of the people of the state. And that leads us to the related subject of Electoral College members voting with their ideology or their opinion instead of how the people of their state voted. It's perilously close to treason, and I would argue it's sedition. That's just asking for a civil war. The only reason an Electoral College member should ever vote against a state is if they have evidence that the election was in some way truly unjust. If the state or federal government enacted laws that forced or persuaded citizens to vote for a candidate, if the state was invaded by Canadians, hell-bent on putting another Justin Trudeau power in America this time, or even if the voting booths were highly compromised and the election results were falsified and the courts couldn't fix it. Without the Electoral College, the United States would end up a direct democracy instead of a constitutional republic. Many states, like North and South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, Delaware, Hawaii, Alaska, Rhode Island, Idaho, West Virginia, and Nebraska, would lose any and all voice for the interests of their people when it comes to the presidency. Many others would lose most of their voices. Presidential candidates would only need to run around and promise a sun, moon, and free and mandatory diversity training classes to a few states, overlooking the desires and needs of the other states. And before you say swing states and suggest that smaller states would still have a voice, those swing states change depending on candidates, new issues, and the zeitgeist of our culture. Leaving state representation up to purely chance is fucking idiotic. Let's pretend for a moment that the crazy progressives in our society get their way and abolish the Electoral College, or basically make it impotent. With the way Congress is done currently, especially with the 17th Amendment being in there for the senator elections, that's not the only issue, but it is a large part of this. We would become nothing but a direct democracy. And under a direct democracy, the only solution would be to abolish all state borders, as they would effectively be meaningless. And doing that would make everyone entirely dependent on these transnational representatives doing what's best for the people of the nation, appealing only to popular vote, which is as hilarious as it is scary. We would quickly fall into an all-powerful beast of a government whose members dictate what is best for you, and the ministries of love, plenty, peace, and truth will help persuade those who don't believe that chocolate rations have been increased, and, for good measure, force you to read the government-mandated Angela Merkel's wonderful achievements. A democracy works fine in a microcosm. People of the states directly vote their mayors and governors and members of the House. But for the highest position in the land, we, as states united under a constitutional contract, need to ensure the president isn't elected by just a few states on a virtue-signaling progressivism kick. Too many idiots would have voted for Hillary Clinton because current year and vagina. Alright. I'm gonna go invent the wheel.